So like some of you, I was born in the late 80s, and that means I didn't get to experience firsthand the music that was coming out of that decade. But as I think back on the music I kind of grew up on, a lot of the bands from that era were part of the discography. Bands like U2, The Police, The Smiths, and others were ones that I kind of learned how to play guitar around, drew my kind of sonic inspiration from. And I think it's kind of cool the way that those sounds and that style of music has kind of come around again in popular culture. For me, at least, I have really become drawn to bands that I think draw at least some inspiration from that decade and that era of guitar tones and of composition, production. I've been really into a band called Night Traveler. They're probably my favorite band in the past 5 years that I've discovered. I love everything they're putting out, so go check them out if you're kind of interested in the world or in the kind of sonic space that I'm feeling inspired by right now. And then bands like The Strike or The Midnight that really kind of nail that like synthwave, 80s inspired pop sound. I've just kind of been really enjoying that type of sound and writing in that vein. And so I thought today we'd do a video just kind of talking about 3 essential elements of 80s style guitar tones. And I'm going to start this off by saying this is sort of adapted and kind of contextualized to some of this kind of modern revitalization of 80s style tones and approaches. It's not going to be a cut and dry copy paste of how to sound like the Smiths or how to sound like U2 or whatnot. But for me, it's kind of a concise way to think about the 3 really key elements of crafting great 80s inspired guitar tones and what you need to think about and how do you need to approach that to really capture the magic and the essence of some of those tones. But before we dive in, if you are someone who's interested in guitar or guitar gear, in writing or producing music, whether it be ambient or 80s inspired rock or otherwise, or if you just enjoy watching gear demos and thinking about the next addition to your rig, please hit subscribe below and follow along the channel here. We do a lot of gear demos. We do a lot of topical videos talking about guitar gear, how to maximize what you have, and what to consider as you're crafting your tone and your sound. And I really love getting to do it. So I appreciate your support along the way. Hit subscribe, drop a comment below with a question or a thought, and go to the back catalog of my channel here if you're looking for specific reviews or demos on gear. We've got a lot of stuff that we've covered. As I looked around the collection here in the studio, my focus quickly honed in on this, the Yamaha Pacifica Standard Plus. It's, for all intents and purposes, a super strat. It's got humbucker in the bridge and 2 single coils, a really awesome sounding and playing guitar. It feels great. It's got a little more of a modern feel in terms of the neck profile and the fretboard. You have this whammy bar at the bridge here with a lot of fluidity to kind of do those 80s type either dive bombs or the kind of pitch jumps when you're playing. And you have a lot of versatility and flexibility with the pickup combinations here. And I think that becomes really important when we're talking about these 80s style guitar tones for a couple of reasons. One being you kind of are morphing between a couple different worlds when you think about the 80s sound, in my opinion. First, you have the really sparkly, jangly, clean tones that often come from these single coil style pickups, and sometimes even the in-between kind of quacky, out of phase sounds that you get from a Strat style guitar. And this Pacifica has a really great example of those, and these pickups sound really awesome. So a great starting point might be a Strat, a super Strat like this, to kind of get those clean tones. And then when you think about the higher gain lead tones, the humbuckers are really where you want to live for those. It gives you that full kind of rich, thicker sound, usually much more compressed, and it just is a good pairing for more gain, whether it's from pedals or amps, to kind of give you that either soaring lead tone or the thicker rhythmic presence for your playing. So for 80s guitar tones, I think it's a really great starting point, considering a guitar like a Strat, like a super Strat, something that has that versatility with single coils and humbucker tones for you to be able to morph between sparkly cleans and thick, compressed, aggressive lead tones. The second essential element for great 80s guitar tone is an amplifier that can provide a really great clean platform and also, again, give some versatility to either taking pedals well or morphing into a higher gain monster. For me, I've chosen the amp behind me here, the Matchless 3015, in large part because it offers some really great, sparkly, bright, present, clean tones. And it's a very simple platform that allows you to kind of push the front end, the preamp, into some saturation and then add some effects on the front end to give you that higher gain sound. This is where I think opinions could definitely diverge. I think there's a lot of options that you could go with when you're thinking about 80s guitar tones in terms of your amplifier. Another great option is the Roland Jazz Chorus series. The JC120 is ubiquitous and a classic for that 80s sound, in part because of those almost sterile, super clean tones that give you that bright, chimey, present top end. Obviously, that amp is known as well for its cool, swirly stereo chorus thing and the reverb on it. But that amp is an awesome example of a really clean platform to be able to create some of those iconic, clean, sparkly 80s guitar tones. Another direction you might go if you're more into kind of the 80s rock thing would be to track down something like a Marshall JCM 800 or one of those higher gain amps that can really do the soaring 80s lead guitar tone well, and also be able to pull back a little bit and give you some passable clean tones. Again, a lot of different options, but for me, I really tend to start with that really clean, really sparkly, clean tone foundation that allows for some flexibility to add some more gain on top with other sources. We're going to hear this setup in a minute with the Pacifica running into the Matchless 3015 head, but first I want to share the third essential element of great 80s guitar tone, and that is a specific combination of a few different effects pedals, mainly compression, modulation, and some reverb. Now, we're using a really straightforward setup here, one that I've really become comfortable with and enjoyed in the studio. We're going to be using a Vox smooth impact compressor that provides a range of different compressed sounds, as well as a cool tube gain control that can introduce some overdrive and saturation into the signal. We're going to be using the HX1 for a smattering of modulation options and kind of go through a few different choices that you can use to get those cool 80s sounds. And then the Strymon Big Sky MX for some reverb. And I'm going to hone in on the modulation sounds here specifically because I think the other two factors are useful and necessary, but maybe are less particular in terms of the style or the type you use. You can get compression from a lot of different sources. I've really loved 76 style compression, something like the Origin Effects compressor. I also use compression in the box a lot with an LA2A style or others in terms of post-production compression on guitars. And then this Vox is really great and useful, like I said, for some of those textures and kind of additional characteristics to your compression. But just having that squish and that kind of compression, especially for clean sounds, to keep things kind of snappy and poppy for that 80s sound is useful and important. And then with reverb, you can use plate reverb, you can use hall reverb. It just kind of is something that can fill out the sound and allow that kind of bloom and that ambiance to create that depth and that space to your playing in your compositions is obviously important there. When we hone in on the modulation effects, effects like chorus, vibrato, and others can really capture that sort of swirly, chimey, sparkly 80s sound. So we're going to use a couple different of my favorites from the HX1, specifically the Retro Reel, which again I think is kind of a more modern take on the 80s sound, a sort of adaptation into the 2020s here that has a little bit more texture and grit, a little bit more irregularity and randomness to it. And then we'll lean into some traditional classic effects like the bubble vibrato and some chorus sounds that can really give you that more traditional and classic 80s guitar tones. Those are the three essentials that come to mind when I think about crafting great 80s guitar tones, and we're going to dive into some of those here and just kind of show some examples of the combination, the setup here with the Pacifica, the 3015 from Matchless, and then the small pedal board here with some compression, modulation, and reverb sounds. Drop a comment or a question below if you've got them here. If you'd add to or subtract from the list of essentials here, let me know and we can talk about that. Or if you've got a favorite band from the 80s or a favorite modern band or artist that kind of captures that aura and the mystique of the 80s guitar tones, drop that below too. I'd love to hear some new music. Let's check out the sounds. So we're just going to start by running through the different elements of the 80s guitar tones here, starting with the Pacifica Standard Plus, going into the Matchless 3015. The Matchless, again, like I said, is a really clean platform until you start to really push the volume on it into the master. And so we've got it pretty clean and fairly bright here to start with, and that's what it sounds like here. So just a really nice clean platform, a lot of sparkle, not a very present like mid-range like you'll find with some of the Marshall stuff. It's just not overly colored in my to my ears, and so you get a nice platform for that sparkly, present, prominent top end, and takes pedals really well. So we've actually got a little bit of reverb on here. I'm going to leave that on as just sort of our foundation, and we're going to add some compression in to kind of hear what that can do to the clean tone, to kind of tighten everything up, make things a little bit more snappy. We are running in one of the in-between pickup positions here, position 4, and so that does give that kind of more quacky, out-of-phase sound in the Pacifica. One I think really works well for those rhythmic, kind of percussive 80s type guitar tones. Here's the signal again without compression, and then I'll kick it on midway through. So again, just kind of sweetens the tone a little bit, tightens it up, and really kind of maximizes that clean, sparkly tone. It works great for the sustain and kind of sparkle of the chordal stuff. It works awesome to really accentuate the rhythmic stuff too. We're going to move over to the HX1 here and throw on some vibrato, which is an effect I used for one of the kind of repetitive parts in that intro sketch, and hear how that can really bring a repetitive kind of rhythmic alt lead part to life. So that's the bubble vibrato effect, one of my favorite modulation sounds on the HX1, and it just kind of gives that bouncy, kind of swirly modulation sound that works well, I think, both for lead type playing as well as rhythm chords. Another one of my favorite sounds, which shouldn't be a surprise to you guys, is the retro reel. I used that a bunch on the intro sketch as well, and that one I kind of lean into when I want some more grit and texture and character to the modulation sounds. I love how the saturation and the kind of texture controls can add some gain and some just overdrive characteristics to your playing. And so we'll do that to kind of show some of the lead sounds you can get. I'm also going to goose the compressor a little bit more to get some overdrive and saturation coming from that too. So that's that retro reel effect, adding the texture, adding the kind of character, the EQ curve that comes and kind of warms everything up, as well as the wow and flutter modulation on that. We can turn the wow and flutter up to kind of hear some more of the swirly, chorusy effect that retro reel can add to your playing. So again, I think I kind of dubbed that as a more modernized kind of extrapolated version of that 80s sound, where you're taking the modulation and kind of chorusy sound and making it more nuanced, unexpected, kind of nostalgic or lo-fi for lack of a better word. And I hear a lot of those types of textures and sounds in bands like Night Traveler and some of those bands that have a lot of 80s inspiration in their music but are kind of a fresh or different take on that sound. We'll leave you with one more kind of 80s inspired tone here from the tri-chorus on the HX1, another great and really classic chorus sound. And this gets you more to the traditional 80s chorusy thing. You can hear that here. So that's a little bit about how I go about creating some of those 80s inspired guitar tones with this setup, thinking about those three essential elements with the guitar choice, the amp, and the pedal board of pedals. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.